والذين يتوفون منكم ويذرون أزواجا يتربصن بأنفسهن 4 أشهر وعشرا فإذا بلغن أجلهن فلا جناح عليكم فيما فعلن في أنفسهن بالمعروف والله بما تعملون خبير.
The wives of men who have died must observe a waiting period of 4 months and 10 days. When they have reached the end of the waiting term, there is no blame on them regarding what they may do with themselves in a fair manner. Allah is well aware of what you do. The wives of men who have died must observe a waiting period of 4 months and 10 days. The waiting period owing to the death of the husband is obligatory even for a woman with whom consummation of marriage has not taken place. A pregnant woman, however, is exempted from this. Her waiting period expires with childbirth, irrespective of whether the time between the husband's death and the childbirth is less than the waiting period prescribed by law. To observe a waiting period does not mean merely that they should refrain from marrying, but also from self-adornment. Hence, we find categorical directives in the hadith that a widow should neither wear colorful and showy dresses and jewelry, make use of henna, kohl, and perfumes, nor set her hair in an attractive style. There is disagreement, however, as to whether the widow may go out of her house during the waiting period. Umar, Uthman, Ibn Umar, Zaid ibn Thabit, Ibn Masud, Salma, Sa'id ibn al-Musayyib, Ibrahim al-Nakhay, Muhammad ibn Sirin, and the founders of the 4 legal schools are of the opinion that during the waiting period, a woman should stay in the house in which her husband died. During the daytime, she may go out to do necessary errands, but her residence should be her own home. On the contrary, Aisha ibn Abbas, Ali, Jabir ibn Abdullah, Ata, Taus, Hassan al-Basri, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and the Zahiris are of the opinion that a widow may spend her waiting period wherever she likes and may even go on journeys.
ولا جناح عليكم فيما عرضتم به من خطبة النساء أو أكننتم في أنفسكم علم الله أنكم ستذكرونهن ولكن لا تواعدوهن سرا إلا أن تقولوا قولا معروفا ولا تعزموا عقدة النكاح حتى يبلغ الكتاب أجله واعلموا أن الله يعلم ما في أنفسكم فاحذروه واعلموا أن الله غفور حليم.
There is no blame on you whether you hint at a marriage proposal to such women or keep the proposal hidden in your heart. Allah knows that you will think of them in that connection, but do not make any secret engagement with them and speak openly in an honorable manner. Do not resolve on the marriage tie until the ordained term has come to its end. Know well that Allah knows even what is in your heart. So beware of Him and know well that Allah is all forgiving, all forbearing.
لا جناح عليكم إن طلقتم النساء ما لم تمسوهن أو تفرضوا لهن فريضة ومتعوهن على الموسع قدره وعلى المقتر قدره متاعا بالمعروف حقا على المحسنين.
There is no blame upon you if you divorce your wives before you have touched them or settled a bridal gift upon them. But even in this case, you should make some provision for them, the affluent according to his means, the straitened according to his means, a provision in fair manner. That is a duty upon the good doers. But even in this case, you should make some provision for them, This sundering of the matrimonial contract after it has been concluded does cause some harm to the woman. God has ordered, therefore, that the person concerned should compensate for the loss according to his capacity.
وَإِن طَلَّقْتُمُوهُنَّ مِن قَبْلِ أَن تَمَسُّوهُنَّ وَقَدْ فَرَضْتُمْ لَهُنَّ فَرِيضَةً فَنِصْفُ مَا فَرَضْتُمْ إِلَّا أَن يَعْفُونَ أَوْ يَعْفُوَ الَّذِي بِيَدِهِ عُقْدَةُ النِّكَاحِ وَأَن تَعْفُوا أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَنْسَوُا الْفَضْلَ بَيْنَكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرٌ.
And if you divorce them before you touch them or settle a bridal gift upon them, then give them half of what you have settled, unless either the women act leniently and forego their claim, or he in whose hand is the marriage tie acts leniently and pays the full amount. If you act leniently, it is closer to God-fearing. And forget not to act gracefully with one another, for indeed Allah sees all that you do. And forget not to act gracefully with one another. Magnanimity in dealings is essential if human relationships are to remain sound and pleasant. If everyone were to stick strictly to his legal rights and claims, a pleasant social life would be rendered impossible.
حافظوا على الصلوات والصلاة الوسطى وقوموا لله قانتين.
Be watchful over the prayers and over praying with the utmost excellence, and stand before Allah as would utterly obedient servants. Be watchful over the prayers. Having mentioned the laws for the guidance of human society, God rounds off this address by emphasizing prayer, for it is prayers which instill in man the fear of God. They inculcate the feelings of goodness and purity and the disposition to obey the ordinances of God and foster adherence to righteousness. Without prayer, it would be impossible for men to persist in observing the laws of God, and they would likely be swept away by a current of defiance and disobedience, as happened in the case of the Jews. And over praying with the utmost excellence, the expression al-salat al-wusta has been variously interpreted to mean the morning, midday, sunset, or night prayers, but no direct statement explaining this expression has come down from the Prophet himself. All the divergent opinions are deductions made by scholars. The opinion of the majority seems to be inclined in favor of the afternoon Asr prayer, since it is claimed that on one occasion the Prophet alluded to this as al-salatul wusta. The event cited in support of this inference is that during the Battle of the Ditch, the Prophet was once so preoccupied with the problems posed by the siege of Medina by the polytheists that he could not perform his Asr prayer within the scheduled time, and the time of sunset drew close. On that occasion, the Prophet said, "God fill the graves and houses of these people with fire. They have caused us to miss our wusta, midmost prayer." This statement led people to believe that the expression midmost prayer referred to the Asr prayer. It seems more likely, however, that the Prophet meant that the cares of the battle had prevented him and his followers from performing the prayer in an excellent way. The delay in the prayer meant that instead of praying with equanimity, concentration, and total devotion, they were forced by circumstances to pray hurriedly. The adjective wusta, in addition to signifying the middle position of the subject that it qualifies, also signifies its excellence. Hence, the expression could legitimately be interpreted both in the sense of the middle prayer, as well as in the sense of the prayer which is formed at the right time and with full devotion and attention to God, a prayer which contains all the attributes of excellence. The admonition which follows, "Stand before Allah as utterly obedient servants," seems to indicate what was meant by the midmost prayer.
فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ فَرِجَالًا أَوْ رُكْبَانًا فَإِذَا أَمِنْتُمْ فَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَمَا عَلَّمَكُمْ مَا لَمْ تَكُونُوا تَعْلَمُونَ. And even if you are confronting a danger, still perform the prayer, whether on foot or riding. And when you are secure, remember Allah in the manner that He taught you, the manner that you did not know earlier.
والذين يتوفون منكم ويذرون أزواجا وصية لأزواجهم متاعا إلى الحول غير إخراج فإن خرجن فلا جناح عليكم فيما فعلن في أنفسهن من معروف والله عزيز حكيم.
Those of you who die leaving behind your wives should make testament of 1 year's provision without expulsion in favor of your wives. And if they themselves depart, there shall be no blame upon you for what they may do with themselves in an honorable manner. Allah is Almighty, All-Wise.
Those of you who die leaving behind your wives, the main discourse has already come to an end. These concluding remarks are supplementary.
وَلِلْمُطَلَّقَاتِ مَتَاعٌ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ حَقًّا عَلَى الْمُتَّقِينَ.
Likewise, let there be a fair provision for the divorced women. This is an obligation on the God-fearing.
كَذَلِكَ يُبَيِّنُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ آيَاتِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ.
Thus, Allah makes His injunctions clear to you, that you may understand.
أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ خَرَجُوا مِنْ دِيَارِهِمْ وَهُمْ أُلُوفٌ حَذَرَ الْمَوْتِ فَقَالَ لَهُمُ اللَّهُ مُوتُوا ثُمَّ أَحْيَاهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَذُو فَضْلٍ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَشْكُرُونَ.
O Messenger, have you thought of those who went forth from their homes for fear of death, even though they were in their thousands? Allah said to them, "Die." Then He restored them to life. Indeed, Allah is bounteous to men, but most people do not give thanks in return.
O Messenger, have you thought of those who went forth from their homes for fear of death, even though they were in their thousands? Here begins a fresh discourse, in which Muslims are urged to struggle and make financial sacrifices for God's cause. Moreover, they have been warned to avoid those forms of corruption which eventually led the children of Israel into decline and degeneration. In order to appreciate this discourse, it should be borne in mind that it was revealed when the Muslims had been driven out of Mecca and had lived in Medina for a year and a half. Exasperated by the wrongs to which the unbelievers subjected them, the Muslims had again and again asked the Prophet to permit them to fight. But when they were at long last asked to fight, some of them showed a degree of reluctance and disinclination. Their attention is now drawn therefore to two incidents in the history of the Israelites, from which they may learn their lesson. Allah said to them, "Die." Then He restored them to life. This refers to the exodus of the Israelites. Surah 5 gives some details of this incident. The Israelites had left Egypt in large numbers and were wandering in the desert, eager to find a home. But when at God's command Moses ordered them to drive the Canaanites out of Palestine and conquer that land, they showed cowardice and refused to proceed. Eventually God let them wander about for 40 years, till one full generation of Israelites had died and been replaced by a new one reared in the tough conditions of desert life. It was only then that God enabled the Israelites to overcome the Canaanites. Their former condition is described as death, whereas the later development is seen as their restoration to life.
وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ سَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ.
So fight in the way of Allah, and know well that Allah is all-hearing, all-knowing.
مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يُقْرِضُ اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا فَيُضَاعِفَهُ لَهُ أَضْعَافًا كَثِيرَةً وَاللَّهُ يَقْبِضُ وَيَبْسُطُ وَإِلَيْهِ تُرْجَعُونَ.
Who of you will lend Allah a goodly loan, which He will return after multiplying it for him manifold? For Allah has the power both to decrease and increase, and to Him you will be returned.
Who of you will lend Allah a goodly loan? Goodly loan signifies whatever one gives to another person selflessly and from absolutely pure motives. God describes whatever man spends in this manner as a loan made to none other than him, and he undertakes to repay that loan and to repay it several-fold. The stipulation, however, is that the loan should be a goodly one, and that is, it should not be tainted with selfish designs, and should be given for the sake of God, to be spent for purposes pleasing to him.
ألم تر إلى الملأ من بني إسرائيل من بعد موسى إذ قالوا لنبي لهم ابعث لنا ملكا نقاتل في سبيل الله قال هل عسيتم إن كتب عليكم القتال ألا تقاتلوا قالوا وما لنا ألا نقاتل في سبيل الله وقد أخرجنا من ديارنا وأبنائنا فلما كتب عليهم القتال تولوا إلا قليلا منهم والله عليم بالظالمين.
O Messenger, have you thought of what happened with the elders of the children of Israel after Moses? They asked one of their prophets, "Set up for us a king so that we may fight in the way of Allah." He said, "Would you possibly refrain from fighting if fighting is ordained for you?" They said, "And why would we not fight in the way of Allah when we have been torn from our homes and our children?" But when fighting was ordained for them, they turned back, except a few of them. Allah is well aware of the wrongdoers.
Set up for us a king so that we may fight in the way of Allah. This took place about 1,000 years before Christ. At that time, the Israelites were persecuted by the Amalekites, who had deprived them of the greater part of Palestine. The prophet Samuel, who was then ruling over the Israelites, was old. The elders of Israel, therefore, felt the need to appoint as their head someone else under whose leadership they could wage wars. By that time, however, the Israelites had become so deeply infected with ignorance, and the customs and practices of non-Muslim nations had made such inroads into their lives, that the distinction between a religious state committed to serving God and secular monarchy was lost on them. They consequently asked God to appoint a king rather than a religious ruler, Khalifa, over them. The information contained in the Bible is as follows. Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, "Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to govern us like all the nations." But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to govern us." And Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Hearken to the voice of the people in what they say to you. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. According to all the deeds which they have done to me, from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you." So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking a king for them. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots, to be his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make the implements of war and the equipments of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the 10th of your grain and your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your menservants and maidservants and the best of your cattle and asses and put them to his work. He will take the 10th of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And on that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel, and they said, "No, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles." And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Hearken to their voice, and make them a king." Samuel then said to the men of Israel, "Go, every man to his city." And Samuel said to the people, "And when you saw that Nahash, the king of Ammonites, came against you, you said to me, 'No, but a king shall reign over us,' when the Lord your God was your king. And now, behold, the king whom you have chosen, for whom you have asked, behold, the Lord has set a king over you. If you will fear the Lord and serve him and hearken to his voice, and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, and if both you and the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God, it will be well. But if you will not hearken to the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you and your king. Now therefore stand still and see this great thing which the Lord will do before your eyes. Is it not wheat harvest today? I will call upon the Lord that he may send thunder and rain, and you shall know and see that your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord, in asking for yourselves a king." So Samuel called upon the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day. And all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. And all the people said to Samuel, "Pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we may not die, for we have added to all our sins this evil to ask for a king." And Samuel said to the people, "Fear not, you have done all this evil, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart, and do not turn aside after vain things which cannot profit or save, for they are vain. For the Lord will not cast away his people for his great name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you a people for himself. Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you, and I will instruct you in the good and right way." These statements from Samuel make it clear that the demand to appoint a king was disagreeable to God and to his prophet. It might be asked, however, why the Quran does not contain any denunciation of this demand of the elders of Israel. The reason is that to the purpose for which this incident has been cited, the appropriateness and otherwise of the demand is irrelevant. The purpose here is to show the extent to which cowardice and self-indulgence had become part of Israelite life, and to show how the lack of moral restraint had come to characterize their conduct. It is these which ultimately led to their decline. The aim of the Quranic narrative is to enable Muslims to derive a lesson from this, and to ensure that these weaknesses do not creep into their own lives.